All right, so.
Sorry about that.
No,
Please,
no worries.
attendees, just mute your microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So good evening, everybody. I hope you all had a good day and that your week is going on okay so far. So welcome to the session. I will start as usual with any GS1 meeting with a GS1 competition law caution, which means that during the course of this conversation, there shall be no discussion of prices, allocation of customers or products, boycotts, refusals to deal, or market share. Usually if there's any conversation that way, we would require legal counsel before having that discussion. So this is just customary statements that we usually start with when we're having meetings within the GS1 space. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Nuran Idris, and I work at GS1 Global Office. I'm looking forward to engaging with you. I imagine for some of you, this is the first time you're hearing about the words GS1. But before I continue, actually, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. All right, so I work at GS1 Global Office. I'll tell you a little bit about GS1. I'll spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes to tell you a little bit about GS1. For those of you that are hearing about GS1 for the first time, so I work out of Nairobi, Kenya. As you can see, I'm working from home, and the electricity is giving me a bit of a challenge today, unfortunately. But hopefully, you can see me for as long as we're speaking together. So I'm based out of Nairobi, Kenya, and I work with African stakeholders. So this includes really manufacturers, distributors, solution providers, regulators, ministries of health, development partners, really anybody that is involved in the traceability conversation in Africa. So I work to raise awareness about GS1 and to support countries or companies that are working towards implementation of GS1 standards. So I'll tell you about everything, every cryptic thing that I mentioned so far over the course of my presentation. So bear with me if some of what I'm saying, aside from that I'm based out of Nairobi, Kenya, sounds a bit cryptic. So I hope to share with you, of course, I would have loved to go around the room to have an introduction, but obviously because of time, that's probably not a good use of our time. So I invite you to use the chat functionality on Zoom and let me know, let us know, or rather let the group know whether you're representing the regulator, whether you're presenting manufacturer, solution provider. Would like to know who's on the call. I, for one, would like to know who I'm speaking to, and that will definitely help me configure the conversation to suit the stakeholders that we have here. So at your own pace, open the chat on Zoom and let us know where you're calling in from. So GS1, I mentioned GS1 a few times already, and I'd like to tell you what GS1 is. So GS1 is a global organization. It's a global standards development organization, and that has been awarded an NGO status by the UN ECOSOC since 2011, and that's what you see over there. And right now we have GS1 Global Office. It's headquartered in Brussels, Belgium, and New Jersey. So it's a joint headquarters. But also GS1 has a representation in 115 countries, and these representations are known as GS1 member organizations. So what exactly? Okay, yes, standards development, but you're probably wondering, standards for what? Standards for who, rather, right? So GS1 standards make it possible to identify, capture, share. So the next time, hopefully the next time somebody mentions GS1, if there's one thing that that I'd like you to take away is think about the GS1 enabling identify, capture, share. You're probably also still wondering, okay, identify, capture, share what, Nuran? Okay, I hope that's what the conversation that you're having to tell you more, right? So when we talk about identify, capture, share, we're talking about, just really think about the supply chain. I invite you to, I don't know, however it is that you close your eyes, or just think about the supply chain and think about the products, the people, the location, the trucks, everything that is involved in the entire supply chain. GS1 standard, not anything, not many things that are involved within the supply chain. GS1 standards, we have GS1 standards that support the unique identification of entities within the supply chain. So when you think about products, for instance, again, for those of you that maybe know a little bit about GS1, you probably have heard about the popular GTIN, the Global Trade Item Number. We have identification standards for locations, the Global Location Number. For patients and care provider, GSRN and GII, and there's a few more, SSCC. But that's just to give you, when you think about when you think about GS1, you think about the supply chain, you think about identify, think about GS1 standards enabling the identification of entities within the supply chain. When you think about capture, again, it's not complicated. Think about the barcode. I am very sure with 100% certainty that you have come across the barcode as you navigated your shopping, perhaps when you went to the grocery store or supermarket, depending on how you call it in Zoom. I'm sure you've seen a barcode, you've seen somebody scanning the barcode. So the captured, the GS1 standards, GS1 developed standards to capture this unique identification, unique items that were identified earlier. And then, of course, we also have a few share standards that facilitates the sharing of this information along the supply chain. And there are multiple benefits, but because this is healthcare focused, I'd like you to zoom in. I'd like you to zoom in on patient safety as the key benefit. Whatever it is that we're trying to do within the healthcare space, within GS1, we're talking about patient safety. How can we make sure that the patient is safe? As you can see, there are, of course, multiple benefits. And I mentioned that we have GS1 Global Office, and then we have local member organizations. So GS1 is both local and it's both international, and it's also local in this 115 countries. So let's take a look within Africa. Of those 115 countries, coincidentally, there's 15 of them that are actually based in Africa, that are actually housed in Africa. And as you can see, there's a few in North Africa, a few in West Africa, just 2 in East Africa, and also 2 in South Africa. And of course, this is Mauritius. So that brings to 15 member organizations of all within the African continent. And that's frankly a really small percentage. I mean, I think for those of you who are here, there's, I think, over 50 countries in Africa, but we only have 15 member organizations. Wow. What I would like to mention here is that you do not necessarily need to have a GS1 member organization within your country in order to advance the mission, to advance the conversations, to use the standards, basically. So that's an important caveat. So before I move on to the next things, I'd really like to see a little bit of engagement on the chat. So in addition to sharing who you're representing, I'd also like you to let us know, for instance, right now, is this the first time that you're hearing about GS1? So this is a simple yes or no. I actually have a poll that I'll probably launch right now. And this is, I think that's probably easier. So I'll just take a few seconds. Do you know GS1? Have you heard of GS1 before? Just want to also see so that, again, I can tailor make the conversation as we go along. Okay, thank you for those of you that have responded. I see that many of you do not know of GS1. So I'll really go slowly on the acronyms. Thank you for your responses. This is really helpful. Let me just share them so that you can get to appreciate that many of us who are here or today do not necessarily know about GS1. So I'll go easy on the acronyms, I promise. Right. But additionally, and also especially for those that are new to GS1 or have not heard about GS1 before, please feel free to leave any questions in the chat. But of course, if you have questions, you're also welcome to unmute. Just let me know, and then I can stop and elaborate further. So I'm going to slow the pace down that much, so to ensure that we're all on the same page here, because I think when we talk about healthcare, we like to say that it's something personal, because either us, I'm sure everybody on the call has at some point needed the care of a healthcare provider, needed some medication to cure, whether it is something minor as a cough or a sneeze, but also something major. But more importantly, I think we also know many people around us who have needed medical attention. And so we know when we think about patient safety, when we think about healthcare, GS1 healthcare especially, we're really talking about something that is personal. So let me take a look. I think this is actually the perfect opportunity then to maybe set the stage once more about kind of like build the case. The objective here is to be able to build the case of GS1 standards use for you. So we have many countries within the region that have high disease burden. I think this is, again, not news. I mean, from top of mind, malaria, TB, HIV, I think these are some of the common diseases that we see around here. But also, more unfortunately, is that falsified medicines is a growing crisis. Of course, I'm focusing on Africa, but we know, for instance, that these are not by any means only African problems, African challenges. They're really across the board. But looking at low and middle income countries across the board, here are some stats from the WHO, which is really, really concerning and really sad. This means that at some point in time, a patient has gone to a doctor, to a pharmacist, and gotten a fake medicine. So that's really what I'd like you to think about here. And as was very obvious with the audience here, with the stakeholders here, not many people know about GS1, and I'm talking about individuals, but I'm also talking about entities such as manufacturers, solution providers, and whatnot. So not many people understand about the standards within the continent. Broadly, there is a lot more awareness, and I'll share with you about what's happening around the world, but within Africa, there's definitely limited awareness. It is changing, but still, this is where we are. And then, of course, we also don't have many solution providers that understand. On the contrary, I like to also look at the positive side of things. There's also a lot of opportunities. And while, like I mentioned earlier, there's a growing awareness of those standards, but also we have a large presence and large support from development partner community. So this is the UN agencies, UNICEF, for instance, UNDP, WHO, USAID, etc., that are actively involved in the conversations in the countries, but also globally are aware of this importance of traceability, of using GS1 standards to better improve the safety of the patient. I'll come back to that later. I wanted, like, when we think about, again, thinking about traceability in a little bit more detail, like what's going on. I probably should go back to this later as well. Let me start with this map here. When we're talking about where GS1 standards are used or are officially recognized, or are where it is where it's just awareness, or where there's a little bit more than just awareness on this African map. So I'd like you to focus on the countries that are blue and green. The blue and green means that sorry, let me start with the blue. The blue means there's some sort of awareness. Like if you go to this country, if you go to the Ministry of Health, if you go to the regulatory authority, the National Regulatory Authority, the FDA basically, somebody will tell you, yes, I know there is something called GS1. I have an idea about that one. On the positive side, though, when you look at the green parts, the green parts mean that these countries have either a published regulation or have a draft regulation that is out there and that requires the use of the GS1 standards. So again, maybe to take a step back for those of you that are hearing about GS1 for the first time, this means that, let me just take an example of Ethiopia. It means that if you go to Ethiopia, they will tell you that all the pharmaceuticals coming into Ethiopia need to be uniquely identified by something that's called a GTIN, the Global Trade Item Number, and that information needs to be encoded in a barcode called the data matrix, the GS1 data matrix. And Ethiopia is, of course, working their way to build on other pieces to enable traceability. And again, let me take another step back, again, really thinking about those that are hearing about GS1, about all this for the first time. So when we think about traceability, I like you to think about a product coming all the way from a manufacturer. Think of any manufacturer, any manufacturer. I think for many of our African countries, a lot of the manufacturers, a lot of the products are imported from abroad. So think about a manufacturer producing their medication. So when we think about GS1 and traceability, we want to make sure that that product, when the manufacturer is manufacturing that product, they're uniquely identifying it, they're putting a barcode on it, and then they're sharing that information somewhere, right? So that when the product moves now to the shipper, to the person that's moving, that's distributing this product, that the distributor has the unique identification and is able to go back and say, okay, these are the products that are actually received from this entity. And then the product goes to the national, it arrives at the port, whether it's at sea or at the airport in the country. And the country is able to say, okay, yes, these are the same products that were manufactured, that were distributed, and here they are. And then within the country, again, I think that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, because then at the country, you have the customs, and then you have the central warehouses, and then you have the regional warehouses, and then you have hospitals, and then you have health centers. And by the time it gets to the patient, you want to make sure, again, when you think about traceability, the best case scenario, you want to be able to look at a product and say, this product has actually traveled all the way from this country, and then it has passed this path. So when you think about traceability, that's what we mean. It's a really massive concept. And GS1 definitely enables that, as I mentioned, identify, capture, share. So after providing that background, moving on to Africa. So this is where we are. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot more conversation. Frankly, if I shared this map with you in 2019, for instance, you would have been surprised. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 countries that knew GS1, that knew traceability, that were actively working towards traceability, right? So this is where we are. And I think with that, I can then come back here and share with you an important message that was that came out, an important outcome of a healthcare conference that happened in Lagos in 2019. It was a call to action, and you have access to this links if you're interested at looking at this further. But the call to action really invited 25 countries and development partner organizations, so the WHO's, USAID's, and whom not. And they told them, let's get together and let's talk about how we can ensure patient safety in our country. How can we do it? And they have set out to define. It's a very brief read, but very empowering. And the photo that you can see in the background here, it's intentionally not very clearly visible, but it's available. Our regulators, our development partners who came together and said, you know what? We want to trace our medicines because we want to eliminate falsified medicines from entering into our supply chains. And since then, this is just a highlight of some of the efforts that have been going on. In fact, actually, I'll just also pause this one and talk about it later because it's a little bit more detailed than I had anticipated. But then maybe to look at it, to look a little bit closer at what's happening in Africa. So I would categorize the progress in Africa into maybe four. Just this is really loose categorization, and it's a very high level. Just to give you an example, it's by no means exhaustive. Okay, so we have policy development. As I mentioned, Ethiopia, Egypt, Rwanda are some of the countries that pop up initially that have published regulation. And again, to reiterate a point I mentioned, what do we mean when we say published regulation? It means that these countries, the regulatory authorities in these countries have come out and said, no product that is entering our country, all the products that enter our country needs to have a GTIN, a global trade item number, which is a GS1 identify standard, and that information needs to be encoded in a GS1 data matrix. And that, of course, they're working towards then how to share that information and then how to build on traceability. Nigeria and Zambia have draft regulations that are out there for public feedback. And then, of course, there's a lot of policy conversations, as I understand it, in South Africa, Botswana, and a few other countries. Then there's also, of course, sensitization and awareness. And this means that there's active conversations. The stakeholders there are trying to understand, okay, what is this thing called GS1? What is this thing called traceability? And what can we do to get there? And here are some of those countries. And maybe in this country, in the countries in this category are potentially conducting pilot projects or assessments just to really understand what it is that they can do to move this forward. And then there's also a few countries that have actually developed a strategy, and the process of developing these strategies are really comprehensive, involving multiple stakeholders across different sectors in the countries, and these strategies have been approved by the highest office within the Ministry of Health in many of these countries. And then, of course, there's the pilot projects that are also happening. Some are product specific. COVID-19, it's something of the past, but it presented a huge opportunity for countries to understand what it is that they needed, how it is that they could actually trace these COVID-19 vaccines. I mean, I think Nigeria has done a lot of work. Rwanda has done a lot of work, and a few other countries as well have also been looking at that one. And then there's component-specific pilot projects that are going on. For instance, master data. Master data is an important. When you think about master data, again, trying to not use too much jargon, but this is a definition of what products exist in the country. And this is an important element, building block for traceability, and it's being piloted in Rwanda and Malawi and a few other countries, of course. And then some are very solution specific. Ethiopia FDA, for instance, has what they call an I-Verify app. It's actually an app that I even have on my phone. And what it does is enables the patient to be able to, the idea is that the patient will be able to scan a product and be able to say, okay, this product is legit or it's falsified. And then Benin also has a project called ePharmacy. Much of this information, especially on the pilot projects, is existing. I'll share with you links that you can read more about this, about these initiatives. So that's what's happening in Africa. And what about the rest of the world? I've talked a lot about Africa, and especially for those of you that are hearing about GS1 for the first time, this is the situation around the world. So where you see a green, again, it means that the countries are actively working towards traceability. It means that the countries have a regulation or have a traceability systems. For instance, in the European Union, there's a traceability system type. It's called the verification system. The US is obviously working on a few systems in South America. So there's really a lot. What I want to share again is to be able to share with you that there's a lot of conversations that are happening around the world. And now we're trying to have this conversation as well in the region of Africa. So I've talked a lot about a GS1 data matrix, a barcode type. So this is just a look. This is not a QR code. It's a GS1 data matrix. And then the first number there, it's called a GTIN. And these regulators that I mentioned here, the greens, basically, they're requesting suppliers that are shipping products into their countries to make sure all the products come bearing this information. So they have a barcode and they have a GTIN, a serial number, expiry date, and a lot batch number. So it's such that if you have, again, a scanner or whatever it is, you should be able to scan that and be able to access more information about that product. So I've said a lot. Nyasha, I don't know if you want to take a pause for questions before I move on to the other pieces.
Yeah, I'm sure you can open up to the floor. Sorry, Vimbai, do you want to take over? Thanks.
I still have a lot more to share, but I wanted to hear in case anybody has any questions. I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, in the chat, I can't see any questions yet. I don't know if there's anyone who's got a question. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Then we'll allow you to ask your question or simply type it in the chat. Thank you. What happened?
Okay. So I hope you're thinking about the questions. I can keep on going, but I'd really like to hear your thoughts and your questions as well. So the G code is read by specialized devices or any smartphone. Okay, so the GS1. So the barcode can be read by any scanner, right? So a handheld scanner. You can use your mobile phone, of course, but you would need an application that will be able to read this one. So it's not a QR code, because I think a QR code for many of the more recent smartphones, you should be able to scan directly a QR code and the barcode reads it natively. This is not the case for the GS1 data matrix. You can use your smartphone, but you would need a specialized app in order to read this one. So again, thinking about the specialized app, I mentioned the Ethiopia FDA's iVerify app. It's exactly how it works. It's an application that the FDA Ethiopia developed. The idea behind, again, is that patients would be able to download the phone and scan the products. But obviously, if you're a pharmacist or if you're in a hospital, pharmacy and whatnot, using your smartphone to scan probably is not necessarily the more seamless, easy thing to do. So that's where, again, handheld purpose-built scanners are more suitable in such cases. Thank you for your question. Okay, so again, really going deeper into the next level, what exactly does this mean practically? How exactly does it work? Again, thinking about the manufacturers, the solution providers, the distributors in the room, you're thinking, okay, yes, we have this concept. We have perhaps maybe also regulators in the room, virtual room, and we're thinking, okay, how do we navigate this one? And that's what I intend to do over the next few slides. And I'd like to start with this. It sounds a bit Shansikwa, but it is, you have to start where you are and with what you have. Like I mentioned earlier, there are countries that are conducting just awareness. There's countries that are conducting sensitizations. There are countries that are conducting pilot projects. There's really a lot of things, a lot of options that are happening out there. And the idea, the key, the best thing is to really start where you are with what you have. If you go around, the next time you have a product or you are in your pharmacy, if you work in a pharmacy, I'd invite you to take a look at the product, particularly, especially those that are coming from India, for instance. You'll be sure to see this kind of a GS1 data matrix. They have a data matrix and they have such a GTIN on it. So what can you do with the resources, with the products that are already identified? I know, of course, And usually the tendency is to think about, oh, not all the products are identified, not all the products carry a GTIN, not all the products carry a data matrix and whatnot and whatnot. However, there are many products that have the necessary markings, products that are imported by USAID, for instance, that are mostly targeted at vertical programs. So malaria, TB, the most, to a large percent, they carry them. Vaccines, for instance, they definitely do carry the GS1 data matrix. Again, most of them. But here are three things that I'd like you to think about. So having local ownership is really one of the most important success factors. This is not a project like many of the projects that we probably may be familiar with in our countries, that it has a definite beginning and an end, but this is really local ownership is it. You have this project, whether it is within a manufacturing site, whether it is within a distributor, it's within a hospital, it's within the country, but there must be local ownership. There must be an interest and a buy-in within in order to advance this one, because it does, when you think about it, introducing scanning, for instance, in your pharmacy, in your hospitals, it is something that changes processes. I'm not even talking about cost implications really, but just really changing processes is not necessarily something easy, and that's why I'm saying having local ownership is really important. And then again, for those of you that are maybe from the private sector here, really working together to develop a strategy, to develop projects and amplifying those projects that inspire. So in an earlier slide that I skipped, there is something called the TRVST. Again, I will have a link of this one in the slide deck that I shared. TRVST stands for Traceability and Verification System, and it is an initiative that was launched by UNICEF, again, around COVID, initially built around COVID, but now it is expanding to other vaccines. But this one provides an initial low-hanging fruit, quick win, inspirational project, pilot project that really gives stakeholders an opportunity to understand, to appreciate, to work on a traceability project and understand, A, what is the level of effort required to do this, and B, what is the change required. I think that's usually the more difficult part, and I think more importantly, see what needs to be done in order to scale that again to include all the products, eventually all the products in the healthcare system. And I think the more challenging one is patience and persistence. I think for some of you, the few that know of GS1, that know of traceability, you probably have had these conversations for years now. And in all these countries, all these countries that you see here and also here, it's not a conversation that started in the morning and then by the evening everything was working. It took years. It's taking years, and there's a lot of changes that are happening, leadership changes, priority changes, natural calamities and whatnot. There's so many things, but patience and persistence are really key in moving forward. But to maybe give you a little bit more broadly, so these are like, I would think these are like 3 pillars that you really need to keep in mind. And here are a more specific set of recommendations, guidance. Again, this is based on the work that has been that we have seen happening in many of the African countries and also around the world. So the first thing is global harmonization. Again, I'd like to go back to this slide here. So wherever you see a green, again, just think about how much effort it is. But the manufacturers, sorry, the suppliers, manufacturers, distributors that are sending products to the countries that you see there's a green, it means that whether right now or in the near future, they will need to have a product with the GS1 data matrix identified with a global trade item number, the GTIN, right? GTIN, G-T-I-N. It means that all these countries somehow had to work together. All the manufacturers somehow had to find a way to work together in order to reach at this stage. So global harmonization. So if a country now comes in and say, okay, oh, we want a different kind of barcode, and we want to include a national number, for instance, or we want to include manufacturer date or whatnot, that would go contrary to what is happening around the world. And as a result, it will create a lot of complexities within the country itself, because manufacturers already complying to this requirement in all of these countries. So being able to go to one particular country and saying, oh, this country needs this requirement, I think it's not necessarily cost effective. And that's really why we're advocating for global harmonization. We are not saying, for instance, that, you know, you should do what the next country is doing. Obviously, every country's situation is unique, but in terms of product identification, when you think about traceability, this is what we're recommending the GS1 data matrix with a G10 global trade item number and all these pieces of information that will eventually be included. So that's the first thing. And then again, I think I already mentioned this earlier, don't do too much at once. Don't think about how you're going to tackle the whole healthcare system, all the products, all the 500, all the 1,000 products that exist in your supply chain. Really think about how you can break it down. Frankly, start with one product if you must. Start with 5 products. Start with a specific disease. And this is exactly what we have seen happening in all the other countries that around the world. Argentina, for instance, is the country that comes to mind. They had decided to phase it by product category. So they had started, I think, with the more expensive, the more falsified, and then they worked their way, and now they have a comprehensive system. But really, so start small and then build from there. And then consistent messaging. Again, there's a lot of resources that you will see that exist within GS1, within WHO, that could be leveraged to have a consistent messaging also as you speak to your stakeholders. So make use of these ones as you speak with them. And then, of course, more importantly, again, solution providers, that we've seen a rise of a number of solution providers that say we know traceability, we know GS1, when in actual fact they don't. And this has resulted in a number of changes within, with a lot of challenges within the countries. We've seen, I think, a few countries that I will not mention here that have had challenges with solution providers who have somehow taken them, who have somehow overpromised and underdelivered. So really keeping in mind, and of course, for the solution providers that are in this virtual room, again, there's lots of opportunities to learn, to understand, to engage, which would definitely encourage you to join these efforts. Within Africa, there's a few, but of course, broadly, there's a lot of opportunities to learn. Please definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you have a solution that maybe does traceability or intends to do traceability, but you're not quite sure how to move on from there. So happy to provide guidance and links and resources and whatnot. So here are the resources that I mentioned. So for those of you that know WHO, I believe everybody in the room knows WHO, especially after COVID. I think they were a very important agency at that time. They still are, but I think they were they provided a lot of guidance. But WHO typically does not refer to one particular standard, one particular system. But within this policy paper, again, that you will see linked, you see that they have explicitly talked about GS1 as a standard for traceability. So I invite you, it's a very interesting, very light read, very not technical read that goes into the details about what GS1 is, what traceability is, and what are the different models and how you can go about it. But that's there. And for the regulators in the room, we have developed a regulatory roadmap since 2019 that has looked at the experiences of multiple countries and come up with very succinct recommendations on what needs to do, what countries can do to implement traceability. So there's a few more resources that I'll just talk about. But again, right now, for those of you, again, if you're interested in learning more, we have this Francophone Summit that is being co-organized with USAID and WHO. It's again, the purpose is to raise awareness, and I especially invite you to. It's a Francophone. It's targeted at Francophone countries. However, there's going to be simultaneous translation, which means that you will be able to listen to the content in English. On day 2, especially, we have, so on day 1, you will be able to hear pretty much in detail of what I briefly touched on earlier. We have countries in Africa talking about their traceability journeys. But then on the second day, we have invited the more experienced countries. So we have Turkey, we have Argentina, we have India, we have South Africa, who will also be talking about how they have set up their traceability systems or building blocks within their countries. So here is the registration link. You'll have access to it when you access the recordings. So do register and join that one. But then, of course, I like to call this the event of the year. So we have the GS1 Healthcare Conference 2023. It's usually a very engaging conference with representatives from really across the board. We have manufacturers, we have regulators, we have solution providers. Really, they all come together and just talk about GS1 for 3 days. So this year's session is going to Sao Paulo in Brazil, and it's in person and virtual. Registration has already been opened since 15th of June. But again, if you think this is too far, thinking really ahead, okay, actually, yeah, just register, but you can also attend in person, but also listen in virtually. And then, of course, this is the GS1 healthcare team that are all available to provide support, and a few other resources that I include there. So at this point, let me check again to see if there's any more questions, but that's really the end of my presentation. And I wanted to open it up to questions, comments, anything that anybody would like to say.
Thank you very much, Nuran, for such an informative presentation. But the one question that remains in my mind is, given the magnitude of issues we have in Africa pertaining to falsified medicines, why is the uptake so low? And is anything being done to improve the uptake of traceability solutions?
Great, thank you for that important question, Mbai. So first thing first, I must mention, GS1 is not a solution. I think this is something that I usually like to clarify because it's been misunderstood as such a lot. So GS1 is not a solution. GS1 develops the standards, and it's up to the countries to use them or to see how best to use them to address the challenges that they have. And then, of course, we have solution providers that then support the countries to implement this one. So why it's very important, and why are countries slowly uptaking this? So like I mentioned earlier, the situation that was in 2019 versus the situation that is today has changed drastically. Looking at this map here, so you're looking at the countries that have that are talking about traceability. So again, if I show you the exact same map from 2019 versus where we are right now, you will see how the number of countries is increasing. Is increasing slowly but surely. It's increasing. But some of the challenges that they usually face, like I mentioned, again, thinking about best practices, ownership is key. And it's a massive undertaking. You need, especially when we think about national traceability, you're thinking about being able to trace the products at the country level, at the national level. you need to have a lot of commitment, a lot of stakeholders working together, a lot of stakeholders talking to each other. And this is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Of course, you are in a country and you understand you understand how difficult or how complex it could be to engage multiple stakeholders on a particular topic. So that's really why it is slow, because we're not encouraging it. And I think for countries that decide, okay, this is only a Ministry of Health project, you see how they will really start, and by the end of year one, nothing will have continued. So the more important aspect here is really just to emphasize how important local ownership is, and to have local ownership and to have stakeholders working together. And that takes time, right? It's not necessarily something that that happens really easily, because we know, again, there's a lot of administrative changes, staff moving around. So you have eventually one staff that understands what needs to be done, and then the next day they've been moved to another department within the Ministry of Health or another department within the government, and that takes the process back. So it's happening, and that's why at least what we're doing is really trying to amplify the message through the various stakeholders that we know are involved in the countries and are supporting. And all of this work, it's being coordinated by a lot of stakeholders. Countries. Okay, so any other questions? Does anybody have any questions that you'd like me to respond to?
We don't seem to have anything in the chat. If there are people with questions, please can you raise your hand so that we can allow you to ask the question? Okay, we don't seem to have questions. It's either everyone's totally confused or the presentation was so good we all understood what you were talking about. Lord. Okay, yes, Nyasha, you can go ahead.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Nuran, for the very insightful presentation. Just to highlight some of the market dynamics here in Zim, I think majority of our products are imported. I think at least 90%. So we're also finding, I think, a lot of products are already coming with the barcoding and the set information. Perhaps just my question is that, is there just going to be more effort to engage a wider variety of stakeholders? I know previously there were some engagements here, so I'm just wondering what are the next steps? Because I think 2019, there was quite a bit of traction with multiple stakeholders, including solution providers, IT solutions, manufacturers, distributors. So I'm just wondering where the process is. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Yasha. So at the country level, frankly, in Zim, I don't know what's happening right now. I know, I think at some point there were some conversations about potentially starting something, but I haven't been in touch. In fact, that was actually a question that I wanted to pose to the group to inquire, especially I'm trying to understand if we have, like, I know we have many people that don't understand the standards, but if you are working in pharmacies, I think there's some of you that are working at, I see in pharmacies, pharmacy, I think it's a pharmacy to pharmacy, okay. So thinking about the fact that, or rather the importance of starting with existing resources. And, we talk a lot about national traceability, and what you're seeing here is the initiatives that are at the national level. But given the amount of interest, given the amount of conversations that was already had, is there something that you think are there opportunities that you see can exist either within your individual pharmacy or broadly, maybe within the pharmacy associations or whatever groups that you have? So in Zim, what, based on what I presented here, how relevant do you think this is for you, or what do you think? What would you say is the next step that you can take towards this mission?
Okay, thanks for throwing it back to our side. I think the initial steps have been taken, and I think, like you correctly mentioned earlier on, I think part of it is roping in, whether it's Ministry of Health and the regulatory authorities. And I think if there is also a reach with some of the development partners, that's perhaps where it can start. Because I think issues of traceability, I think, are extremely important. I think given some of the challenges and issues we are facing, perhaps it's about maybe understanding what are the various hurdles that they're encountering themselves, whether it's at a regulatory level or from a ministry level. So perhaps it needs to be answered at a higher level than myself.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, and maybe just to share, broadly, again, based on what I'm seeing, at least in other countries, it's so you need somebody who understands what needs to be done, and then you need to then have the next step would be to bring those conversations into existing fora. So again, yes, the development partner community has an important role to play, has a role to play, but I think a lot of the work also still sits within the power of the authorities, within the power of associations and whatnot. How could they? Because it's, for instance, policy. It's the development partners. Again, what I'm seeing is that there's so much that they can do on that front. To change the policy, to require traceability and whatnot. So that is a conversation that needs to happen within the stakeholders themselves. What I do see the development partner community really helping is to sensitization, awareness, and really building awareness of this conversation, of bringing this conversation to the stakeholders. But ultimately, obviously, finding that champion within, especially the government, and having that champion, carry that flag, carry that conversation until it reaches widespread. So it's just really like starting a fire. You need somebody who would come and light it up, and then that's how it gets spread to the others. So I still think even within your respective groups, if you have associations, really thinking about how that conversation could start at that level would really greatly help the conversation broadly. But I've definitely spoken too much here. I'd really like to open it up to everybody else that's here.
Thank you very much, Nuran. Participants, is there anyone with any comment or questions? Maybe I will ask somebody who's in the retail sector to maybe just comment on the current discussions, and maybe how you would think we could be able to implement this in our supply chain. I can ask maybe Mrs. Coero.
This is a very interesting innovation, and it would really help in our setting. Look at the number of times where we hear about falsified medicine being found on buses or at the marketplace, or in salons, or that sort of thing. So I think this type of intervention right from the manufacturer or from the importer, from the importers into the entry level, to the wholesalers, and then to the retail community pharmacies, we would be able to see whether the trends match the quantities we have imported. If there is any excess stock outside of what we have imported, where is it coming from? Is it safe? Has it been qualified? Has it been passed through the regulators? There is scope, there is lots of work to be done, but if we hit the ground running and there is funding, the case is clear. We need to make sure we are passing through to our customers safe, efficacious, quality, well-tested medication, kept at the correct temperatures, at the correct places, dispensed by qualified people, distributed by authorized people from authorized premises. So there really is scope, and we could benefit if this is, spread across the whole value chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Goiro. As you were talking, I actually was thinking that a very pertinent thing that I didn't quite catch from the presentation was the cost associated with complying to the standards or adopting traceability standards. Is there a cost associated with it, or so that we know what the impact might be on the patient?
I would have actually been very surprised if we finished this webinar and nobody asked that question. The cost, or the question of cost, definitely always comes up. It's not a very straightforward response. So in terms of how much it will cost, yes, there's a cost that is involved. On the part of the country, the regulator, obviously, they have to set up the necessary systems that will trace a product. So if it's going to be an IT system, if it's going to develop an application or buy the scanners and whatnot, there's definitely cost associated there. For the local manufacturers, there's a cost involved in making sure, I think this would involve changing their printing line, the production lines, to make sure that they're able to incorporate this type of printing, for instance. So there's definitely a cost that is involved, and the cost varies massively depending on what the objective is, depending on who we're talking about, and that's a conversation, obviously, that's also discussed of it at a high level in the documents that you will have access to.
Okay, thank you very much. I've noted we've got quite a number of regulators in the chat, maybe particularly from the persons maybe who are involved in licensing. What would you say maybe is the magnitude of the problem we have with falsified medicines? Do we have such data available? Mr. Mchikawawiri. Oh, sorry, I think I didn't notice he had been booted out, but he's just joined. Mr. Mchikawawiri, I was asking whether we've got actual data that shows us the magnitude of the problem we have with falsified medicines in Zimbabwe.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I had been booted out. So in terms of the actual data, we haven't really had anyone who has actually done the study. But overall or generally, I can really say we also have a challenge with SFs. As you know, most of the medicines that are actually sold on the street, sometimes you can't really tell if they are substandard or falsified. So in terms of the data, really, it would be something that actually someone has to do for us to have a scientific position. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And I think Prof. Katerere has just posted a link to a conversation on fake medicines in Africa. Maybe when people get an opportunity, they can just go into the conversation and just have a feel of what people are talking about around the subject. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, if I may, Umbai, yeah, I think it's anything between 10% and 70%, right, of medicines in any one country, depending on where you are. And nobody's safe because I think in the US now, they recently had, I don't know what you'd call it, incidents or outbreaks, because these things are killing people. But I think apart from these downstream interventions, we also need to think about upstream interventions. So if, for instance, we support local production, it also means that some of these things are cut out because your lines of supply, your lines of logistics are now much closer to, to the people. People also become more familiar with the products that they're taking, but at the moment you've got brands coming from pretty much anywhere across the world coming into African markets one time. There's so many different brands. So then the users of these products are not always familiar with the products. The dispensers of the products are also not generally, familiar with these. But I think it's an interesting technology, and it definitely puts a lot of focus on a neglected disease, really, because that's what it is. If something is killing people, it's something of great public health importance. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I think I'd just like to chime in here, and I think I definitely 100% agree with you that this is an international problem. I think if you recall, during the pandemic, COVID recently, well, not so recently, but still fresh enough, we were hearing cases of falsified PPE all over the world, really. So it's definitely not a localized solution. It's not a localized challenge. It definitely is happening across the board, and some action definitely needs to occur there. And it starts here, right? So we need to talk about it. We're here. And I think the other thing that I wanted to really clarify, GS1 is technology agnostic. So it's not a system that you can actually download, but rather it enables the supply chain stakeholders to identify products, identify locations, identify people, etc. And then it enables you to capture, it provides guidance on how this can be captured, and the information shared subsequently. So I've heard a number of people say, we want to implement the GS1 system, thinking that it's something that you actually download. And I think that's also one of the challenges, Nyasha, to your earlier question. A number of, we've had to go through to speak with a number of regulators saying that, okay, GS1 is not a system, because obviously, again, the champions that I mentioned earlier would go and say, okay, we want to implement traceability using GS1 standards, and wait. People are saying, why are we choosing GS1? Are there other GS1s around that we are not looking at? So GS1 is not a system. There's no download link that I can provide you. It's not there. It doesn't exist. I can give you a link. You do have a link to GS1 website where you can actually read all the standards and whatnot. And again, it's in your hands to say what you want to do with them. And right now we're thinking about traceability, but there's definitely many more use cases that are available that you can have a look at. I think there's another, is it a comment? Let me just read it out. In terms of market control, we would say the normal supply chain, there is a bit of control as other interventions as GMP inspections and traceability, etc. However, with unregistered products, there's a high risk of SFs, as there is minimal control, and hence questions are really needed and can be very handy. Okay. Yes. So I think, Sly, thank you for that comment. I think one of the things that I'd like to also maybe add regarding there, again, the quality of the product is still in the hands of the maker of the product, the manufacturer of the product. So again, GS1 standards will not magically improve the quality of the product because, again, as you mentioned, the GMP and what all these other processes still needs to continue. What GS1 does or can enable, what traceability can enable, is to be able to tell you, well, this product that you're looking at, I actually had one here, yes. Well, actually, what GS1 enables you to tell you, this product that you're looking at, you see, this is the GS1 data match. So this product that you're looking at is indeed the product that this company manufactured when, from this particular location, particular country. So whether that manufacturing was following good manufacturing practices, whether the product is of low quality or whatnot, that is besides the point, or rather beside the scope of GS1. So GS1 will be able to tell you, yes, what you're looking at is indeed from that manufacturer and not necessarily a copy from this and that and that and that manufacturer. So I think these are a few points that I thought I also wanted to re-raise based on, again, conversations that I've had with other groups, other stakeholders. So back to you, Vimbashi. Sorry. Vimbai, sorry. Vimbai.
Thank you very much for such an insightful presentation. And yes, I think the map really got me worried, but it's a takeaway that we need to stew over, maybe as professionals, to see how maybe we can get the conversation started and work around the current standards. Nyasha, do you have any housekeeping issues?
All right, thanks, Subhaya. The only thing is that, look, I'll be sharing a link shortly for